Imagine walking into a church, a museum, or even your own home and seeing Jesus. What do you see? A man with long flowing hair, fair skin, and piercing blue eyes. This image has been ingrained in our minds for centuries. But what if I told you that this version of Jesus, so familiar to many, isn't quite what history had in mind? For years, the world has seen Jesus in one way, a white European figure. But history tells a different story, one that's often been overlooked. The truth lies in ancient texts and forgotten icons in the very roots of Christianity. So let's take a step back and ask ourselves, who was Jesus really, and what does it mean when we finally uncover the truth about his race and identity? Could understanding this shift the way we see his teachings and each other? Today, we're going to explore something that might just change everything you thought you knew. Stay with me as we dive into a powerful journey that challenges centuries of tradition. Let's begin. Section 1. The historical and biblical context of Jesus' identity. Let's start by looking at the most important source we have about Jesus, the Bible. When we read the descriptions of him, they offer us some fascinating clues about his true appearance. In Revelation 1:13-16, it's written that Jesus' hair was like pure wool, and his feet were like burnished bronze. Now, think about that for a moment. Pure wool suggests a texture most commonly associated with Afro-textured hair. And burnished bronze points to a rich, dark brown skin tone. These aren't the descriptions of the light-skinned, blonde-haired Jesus many of us have grown up seeing in art and media. The Bible also offers us a glimpse into the world Jesus lived in. He was born in the Middle East, a region where people typically had darker skin. It's important to remember that the world of Jesus wasn't like the one we see in modern-day European or American depictions. It was a place where diversity was abundant, and Jesus was part of that rich cultural landscape. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter? It matters because these biblical descriptions help us understand Jesus not as an outsider to his time, but as someone deeply rooted in the communities he walked among. He wasn't distant or separate from the struggles of the marginalized. He was one of them. Think about how people of different cultures have often felt empowered by seeing figures of their own identity reflected in positions of power or leadership. It's the same for communities today. Seeing a Jesus who reflects their own identity isn't just about historical accuracy. It's about seeing their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs reflected in the Savior's story. So, what can we learn from this? We learn that understanding Jesus' identity is not just a matter of theology. It's about reclaiming the connection between his life and the lives of the oppressed, the marginalized, and the forgotten. Now that we've explored the biblical context, let's dive into how history itself shaped the image of Jesus, and why it might not reflect the truth we've just uncovered. Section 2. The Rise of the White Jesus, a Cultural and Political Shift. As we've seen, the early depictions of Jesus reflected a more diverse Middle Eastern heritage. But over time, the image of Jesus began to change dramatically. This shift didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't just about artistic preference. It was a cultural and political decision that carried deep implications. In the Renaissance, from the 14th to the 17th centuries, European artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo began depicting Jesus and other biblical figures as white, with fair skin, long hair, and European features. These portrayals were not coincidental. They were part of a broader effort to align Christian iconography with the tastes and ideals of the European elite. Christianity, already spreading across Europe, needed to feel more relatable to the growing European population. One of the most famous depictions of Jesus, Da Vinci's The Last Supper, portrays him in a distinctly European manner. This was part of a wider trend where religious figures began to look like the people who were commissioning the artwork. It wasn't just art. It was about reinforcing power dynamics. The image of a white Jesus became a symbol of European dominance in the world, especially as colonial powers expanded. This cultural shift didn't end with the Renaissance. The portrayal of Jesus as a white man continued into the colonial era and beyond, where it was used to justify racial hierarchies, particularly during the transatlantic slave trade. By presenting Jesus as a white man, the powerful could more easily reconcile the oppression of black people with their supposed moral superiority. After all, if Jesus looked like them, it made the system of slavery and colonialism easier to accept. What we can take away from this history is that images matter. The image of a white Jesus became a tool, not just of art, but of control. It reinforced the status quo and made it harder for people, especially people of color, to see themselves in the story of Jesus. Over time, this misrepresentation didn't just distort history, it shaped how entire generations viewed race, power, and divinity. Now, let's take a look at how, despite this cultural shift, some communities have held on to a different image of Jesus, one that aligns more closely with the truth. Let's explore the rich history of Black Jesus depictions and how they've been preserved throughout the centuries. Let's dive into the rediscovery of Black Jesus icons. Section 3. Black Jesus, Rediscovering Early Christian Icons and Identity. While much of Western art embraced the image of a white Jesus, there's another side to the story, one that's been preserved in the hearts and traditions of certain Christian communities. In places like Ethiopia and Egypt, the image of a black Jesus has always been part of the faith. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, has long depicted Jesus as a man with darker skin. In fact, some of the earliest known Christian icons dating back to the 4th and 5th centuries show a Jesus with African features. These icons were not just religious art, they were a way of connecting with a faith that was deeply rooted in African identity and heritage. A remarkable discovery in Syria also revealed one of the oldest known images of Christ, showing him with short woolly hair and dark skin, completely opposite to the Europeanized versions that would later dominate the art world. This isn't a modern revision. For centuries, Black Christian communities across Africa and the Middle East have maintained these depictions of Jesus, ensuring that their faith was reflected in their own image, much like the earliest Christians did before the rise of European dominance. What we can learn from these preserved images is that the connection between faith and identity is powerful. These icons remind us that Jesus' message transcends any one culture or race, but it's also rooted in the unique experiences of the people who followed him. By seeing Jesus as someone who looked like them, these communities felt a deeper connection to his teachings and a sense of belonging within the Christian story. More recently, there has been a resurgence in the celebration of Black Jesus icons in churches worldwide. In Russia, for instance, Vladimir Putin supported the preservation of Black Jesus icons within the Russian Orthodox Church, shining a light on the rich diversity of Christian heritage. By rediscovering these icons, we're reminded that Jesus' identity was never confined to a European image. He was a global figure, resonating with people from all walks of life, and his image has always been reflected through the lens of those who followed him. Now that we've seen the beauty and significance of Black Jesus icons, let's explore the social impact of misrepresenting Jesus' race. How has the whitewashed image influenced the world, and what can we do to correct it? Let's find out. Section 4. The social implications of misrepresenting Jesus' race. The misrepresentation of Jesus' race isn't just an artistic or historical issue, it has deep social and cultural implications. When Jesus is depicted as a white man, it can reinforce ideas of racial superiority and power dynamics that have shaped history. For centuries, the image of a white Jesus was used as a tool in justifying systems of oppression. In the United States, during the era of slavery, many used the image of a white Jesus to maintain a social hierarchy. Slave owners, for example, often depicted Jesus as white to validate their authority and control, subtly sending the message that those in power and the oppressed were divinely ordained. This portrayal made it easier to rationalize the idea that Black people were inferior and meant to serve. Even today, the image of a white Jesus continues to impact communities. In the United States, many African American churches have found that seeing a white Jesus can be alienating. When the dominant image of Jesus is far removed from your own identity, it can feel like the faith is not truly yours, like your story is disconnected from the story of salvation. On the other hand, the reintroduction of Black Jesus imagery in churches and art is providing a sense of empowerment. By embracing depictions of Jesus as a Black man, people of African descent are finding a deeper connection to his message. It's a way of reclaiming Jesus as part of their story, something that has always been true but often overlooked. The lesson here is clear. Imagery matters. The images we see shape how we understand the world and our place in it. When people see their own faces reflected in powerful symbols, it helps them feel valued and understood. For centuries, the absence of this reflection in religious imagery has left many marginalized communities feeling disconnected from their faith. In recent years, movements to embrace diverse depictions of Jesus have gained traction, with churches and artists pushing for more inclusive images. This isn't just a theological shift, it's a cultural one, helping to heal old wounds and challenge the historical narratives that have divided us. Now that we've seen how misrepresentation has affected communities and the broader culture, let's discuss what we can do moving forward. How can we reimagine the image of Jesus today to better reflect his true identity? Let's explore how these changes can impact the world we live in. Section 5. Call to Action. Reimagining Jesus' image for today. Now that we've journeyed through the history and implications of Jesus' image, it's time to ask ourselves, how can we reimagine Jesus for today? How can we shift away from the familiar whitewashed portrayal and embrace a more inclusive, historically accurate image? Reimagining Jesus is not about replacing one image with another. It's about acknowledging the rich diversity of the Christian faith and honoring the true essence of Jesus' teachings, teachings that transcend race, culture, and time. By embracing a more diverse representation of Jesus, we create space for everyone to see themselves in his story, to feel a connection that's both personal and powerful. Many churches and faith communities are already embracing this change. African American churches have long celebrated Black Jesus imagery. But now, this movement is growing. In communities across the world, people are starting to choose images of Jesus that reflect the diversity of the global church, from Asian to Hispanic, and yes, Black depictions as well. For example, in recent years, churches have started using art that depicts Jesus with darker skin tones, in line with the historical context of his life. This helps people, especially from marginalized communities, feel that Jesus' love and message is truly for them, no matter their background or color. The lesson here is that imagery matters. It shapes how we see ourselves in the world. By embracing diverse depictions of Jesus, we can honor his message of inclusivity, justice, and love. These images remind us that Jesus belongs to everyone, no matter their race or culture. Even in art galleries and museums, we're beginning to see a shift. The Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., for example, has featured exhibits that showcase Black Jesus icons, sparking important conversations about race, identity, and faith. So, what can you do today? If you're a Christian, consider the images of Jesus in your own home or community. Do they reflect the diversity of the world Jesus lived in? If not, think about how you might embrace more inclusive representations that speak to your heart and the hearts of others. As we close, remember that reimagining Jesus is about more than just art. It's about seeing his message of love and acceptance in everyone, no matter their background. So let's move forward, embracing a more inclusive vision of who Jesus was and what he stood for. Let's carry these thoughts with us and let them inspire change in our hearts and in the world around us.